The year was 1940. Across the skies of Europe, thunder roared, not from storms, but from the relentless engines of the Luftwaffe. Overhead, sleek Messerschmitts sliced through the clouds like steel knives, their shadows casting fear across towns below. And yet, in the midst of chaos, there were boys, no older than 18. Youthful faces, untested hands gripping cold metal, hearts pounding with a mixture of terror and resolve. These were not seasoned pilots with decades of experience. These were teenagers plucked from classrooms, fields, and small villages, thrust into the deadly ballet of aerial warfare. Every sunrise brought the roar of engines, the flash of tracers, the whine of dive bombs. And yet somehow they adapted. Every mission was a test of nerves, every sortie a confrontation with mortality. They learned quickly, because the alternative, failure, was unthinkable. Imagine the moment before engagement. The engine hums, the smell of fuel and metal, fingers tightening on the controls. The radio crackles with warnings of incoming formations. Your best friend in the next cockpit gives a fleeting nod, a silent pact of trust. Below, the earth seems impossibly far away. And above, a storm of enemy planes approaches, indifferent to the boy piloting the fragile fighter. Here courage is not born of age, but in the heart of the Battle of Britain. 18-year-olds became the last line of defense against the Luftwaffe's relentless assault. They were barely men by any measure, yet the sky demanded they fight as if they carried the weight of nations on their shoulders. The war had stolen their youth before it had properly begun. They had been plucked from classrooms, farms, and small towns and placed into cockpits of fragile machines with one mission: to stop the German war machine from devastating England's cities. The horizon stretched endlessly, painted in shifting hues of grey and gold, but above it, the roar of engines was unceasing. Messerschmitts and Heinkels tore across the clouds with mechanical precision, leaving trails of black smoke that cut through the blue sky like ominous ribbons of death. And against them, these boys, still learning what it meant to truly live, climbed into the cockpit of Spitfires and Hurricanes. Their hands trembling, yet their resolve hardening with every heartbeat. Every sortie began with a cocktail of fear and adrenaline. As the engine thrummed beneath them, vibrations seeping through their fingertips, they could feel the aircraft alive beneath them, responsive yet fragile, a partner in a deadly dance. The cockpit smelled of oil, fuel, and metal, a pungent reminder that they were far from the safety of home. Flight instructors had drilled maneuvers into them tirelessly, but no amount of classroom theory could prepare a boy for the first moment he saw tracer rounds scream past, narrowly missing a wingtip, or the sudden flash of a dive-bombing Messerschmitt that seemed to leap from the clouds with intent to destroy. In that instant, instinct took over, a strange combination of terror and clarity that sharpened every sense. Eyes tracked every shadow, every glint of sunlight on enemy metal. Hands moved automatically over controls, throttling and banking, performing maneuvers learned only hours or days before in training. They learned quickly that dogfighting was not about strength, but precision, observation, and the ability to think faster than fear itself. One miscalculation could mean spiraling toward the ground in a fiery explosion, the debris scattering over fields that moments before were peaceful and quiet. Yet for all the danger, there was an unspoken exhilaration, a rush of pure consciousness that only came when life and death hung by a thread. They had to learn to anticipate the enemy's moves, to read the subtle signals in the Luftwaffe pilot's behavior, the tilt of a plane's wing, the shadow of an approaching fighter on the cloud below, the rhythm of engine hums indicating a turn or dive. Their youth, which might have been a weakness, became a peculiar advantage. They were unburdened by decades of fear, capable of rapid reaction, and able to absorb the sensory overload of combat with a clarity that stunned even the older pilots. Each engagement carved new lessons into their minds. Some days they would emerge from the clouds exhilarated, having shot down one or more enemy aircraft, their hearts pounding, adrenaline still surging as they coasted over the coastline toward home airfields. On other days, they would return in silence, haunted by the loss of comrades whose names and faces would forever flicker in memory. They carried with them the weight of entire communities, aware that each intercepted bomber might spare a village, a school, or a street from destruction. Every plane they faced was more than a machine. It was a symbol of fear, a living reminder that they had been forced to grow up overnight. And still, they climbed higher, flew faster, and reacted sharper than many seasoned pilots could manage. The skies over Dover, Kent, and the southern English countryside became theatres of courage. The sun glinted off polished aircraft fuselages. Smoke from anti-aircraft fire curled in thick black lines through the clouds, and distant towns below braced for impact. Young eyes scanned constantly, calculating distances, angles, and speed with a precision born of necessity. Their peers back home might have been at dances or football matches, yet here, these 18-year-olds were immersed in a choreography of life and death, where one wrong move meant obliteration. The fear never fully subsided. It transformed into a steady companion, a pulse in rhythm with the engine, a reminder that every second mattered. In these moments, camaraderie became essential. A glance between pilots, a hand signal, a slight adjustment in formation, conveyed messages more vital than words. Trust was forged instantly, and bonds were strengthened in the crucible of combat. Each boy knew that the life of his wingman might depend entirely on his actions, his reflexes, and the split-second choices he made while diving, rolling, and spiraling through the sky. And so, despite exhaustion, hunger, and the constant drumbeat of mortality, they found focus. Fear transformed into determination, hesitation into precision, and youth into deadly skill. The sky itself seemed alive with tension. Clouds became both shields and traps, shifting in patterns that could conceal an enemy or betray a surprise attack. The Luftwaffe pilots, trained and disciplined, underestimated sometimes the raw instinct, audacity, and adaptability of these young defenders. A sudden climb, a tight roll, or a daring attack from below could alter the course of a skirmish entirely. They were learning to fight not just with machines, but with intuition, courage, and the kind of reckless bravery that only youth can sustain. Each aerial duel was a test of mental fortitude, physical skill, and the fragile thread connecting life and death. And when the sun dipped low over the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of crimson and gold, the boys would return, wings scorched, hearts thundering, minds replaying the chaos of the day. Their families might see them as boys still, but they carried scars and wisdom far beyond their years. They had faced steel birds of death, met their gaze, and survived. Theirs was not a story of innocence, but of transformation. 18-year-olds, fragile in body but resolute in spirit, had stood as the thin, determined line between destruction and survival, proving that courage and deadly aim are not measured by age, but by the strength of will and the clarity of vision under fire. The terror of the Luftwaffe was not confined to their planes alone. It was in the precision, the relentlessness, and the cold efficiency of their strategy. Wave after wave of German aircraft tore across the English skies, bombers followed by fighters, their formations calculated to strike fear and chaos into every town and city below. The 18-year-olds who took to the air against them had no illusions. Each encounter was a test not only of skill, but of survival. The boys were confronted with aircraft far larger and more powerful than their own Spitfires and Hurricanes. Each bomber, a fortress in the air, bristling with defensive guns, carrying destruction to unsuspecting civilians. Yet despite the overwhelming odds, these young pilots discovered a deadly rhythm, an instinctive pattern that allowed them to anticipate the enemy's movements and exploit the tiniest vulnerabilities. Training had given them technique, but combat honed intuition. They learned to read the subtle cues of enemy formation, how a wingtip might tilt just before a dive, how the whine of an engine could signal a turn, how the slightest shadow against the clouds might betray an ambush. Each successful interception required split-second calculations. Speed, altitude, wind, trajectory, and timing had to converge perfectly, leaving no room for hesitation. In these moments, fear transformed into a sharp clarity. The adrenaline coursing through their veins was no longer chaos. It became focus, a razor-edged awareness of everything around them. They learned to trust their instincts above all else. Understanding that hesitation, even for a heartbeat, could be fatal, the rhythm of battle became almost musical, a brutal symphony of metal, fire, and sky. The young pilots began to anticipate each other's moves, forming silent communication with gestures and glances. They understood that their mission extended beyond personal survival. Every bomber they downed, every formation disrupted, could save countless lives on the ground. In the midst of chaos, they became instruments of protection, a living line between destruction and safety. Their youth, once seen as vulnerability, became a paradoxical weapon. They were fearless in ways older pilots could not be, reacting with the quick adaptability of those who had nothing left to lose but everything to protect. Each encounter left indelible marks on their minds. The exhilaration of a perfectly executed maneuver, swooping in to force a bomber off course, watching tracer fire tear past, seeing the enemy plane falter and fall, was tempered by the sobering realization of the destruction around them. Explosions over villages, buildings collapsing, smoke curling into the sky. They carried these images back with them, ingrained in memory, mingling with the sense of triumph. Some nights, the adrenaline ebbed, and the haunting images emerged in their quiet moments, leaving the boys to wrestle with emotions far beyond their years. They were warriors forged in fire, and the cost of that fire was measured in both victory and grief. Survival demanded more than courage. It demanded ingenuity. The Luftwaffe's formations were relentless, precise, and adaptive. If one plan failed, another followed. But the young pilots discovered ways to turn the enemy's strength against them. By studying patterns, by improvising maneuvers, by trusting their instincts, they could create openings where none seemed to exist. One daring climb could place them above a bomber squadron. One sharp roll could bring them behind a pursuing fighter. One carefully timed burst of gunfire could take down a plane twice their size. With each encounter, they became more than students of flight. They became tacticians of the sky, blending youthful audacity with a growing mastery of aerial combat. Comradeship became an unspoken lifeline. In the heat of a skirmish, words were impossible. Trust was demonstrated through precise flying, protective maneuvers, and instinctive coordination. A glance, a subtle adjustment in position, a mirrored move. These became communication, saving lives in ways spoken language could not. They relied on one another, each boy acutely aware that the life of his wingman could depend entirely on split-second reactions. This bond, forged in the fire of battle, was unlike any friendship known on the ground. It was immediate, profound, and unbreakable, built on shared fear, shared triumph, and shared survival against an enemy that seemed invincible. As days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, the young pilots began to evolve. They no longer viewed the sky as merely a space of terror. It became a theater where their skill, courage, and instinct coalesced into mastery. They learned to anticipate attacks before they happened, to maneuver in ways that older pilots marveled at, and to exploit weaknesses in formations that the Luftwaffe considered flawless. Their youth allowed for creativity, spontaneity, and audacity. They became instruments of calculated chaos, striking with precision and disappearing before retaliation could come. And yet, beneath the mastery, the weight of responsibility remained. Each victory was a reminder of the stakes, each loss a permanent scar on their hearts and minds. By the summer of 1940, the pattern was clear. The Luftwaffe was powerful. relentless and deadly, but the defenders, these 18-year-old pilots, were unpredictable, courageous, and relentless in their own right. They had turned fear into a tool, uncertainty into intuition, and youthful audacity into deadly skill. Theirs was a war of survival, not just against an enemy, but against the forces of doubt, terror, and inexperience. They became legends not through age, but through their willingness to face overwhelming odds, to stand in the breach, and to fight with an intensity and precision far beyond their years. By the time the horizon glowed with the dying light of another day, these boys, once untested and uncertain, had become warriors of the sky. They carried with them the echoes of every dogfight, every bomber forced from its path, every life protected by their deadly aim. In the silence of the airfield, beneath the fading sun, they would remove helmets, wipe sweat and grime from their faces, and for a moment allow themselves to be mere boys again. But the sky never forgot. Neither did they. Every sortie had transformed them. Every engagement etched courage, skill, and sacrifice into their very souls. And the lesson they imparted was undeniable. Sometimes youth, instinct, and courage, when honed under fire, could defy even the most formidable machines of war. Beyond the dogfights and the smoke-filled skies, there was a quieter, yet no less profound toll that the war exacted on these 18-year-old pilots. The adrenaline of combat faded when they returned to the airfields, leaving in its wake the heavy weight of exhaustion, reflection, and memory. They were young, still boys in many ways, yet the war aged them faster than any school or labor could. Their hands, calloused by grips on control sticks, trembled from tension. Their eyes, wide and bright during flight, now reflected the shadows of the horrors they had witnessed. The letters home, those fragile threads of connection, were often left unwritten. Words seemed inadequate, insufficient to carry the truths of the skies they had navigated, the planes they had destroyed, the friends they had lost. Silence became their companion. Even in moments of rest, the sounds of engines, tracer fire, and distant explosions echoed in memory, a relentless reminder that the war never truly paused, even if they were grounded. In the dim glow of the airfield at dusk, helmets set carefully aside, the boys would sit together, shoulders heavy, sharing stories in fragments, half-sentences, unspoken thoughts, and the occasional necessary humor that kept despair at bay. They spoke of maneuvers, enemy formations, and near misses with the same precision they used in the cockpit. Yet beneath the tactical details lay the raw human reality, fear, hope, guilt, and a growing understanding of mortality. The skies had taught them lessons no classroom could. That courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to act in spite of it. That every decision could mean life or death. That friendship could be forged in the briefest exchange of a glance mid-flight. Every landing, every return from a sortie was a victory, not just over the enemy, but over the chaos within themselves. But the consequences of survival were profound. They carried within them the memories of destroyed towns, buildings reduced to rubble, and fires that raged unchecked. The faces of civilians, frightened and desperate, appeared in fleeting visions behind closed eyelids. Even a victorious dogfight did not erase the realization that for every bomber they downed, the world below still bore scars of war, smoke rising from fields, cries carried on the wind, and towns reshaping themselves in the aftermath of destruction. Their victories were bittersweet, tinged with the knowledge that their skill and deadly aim could only stave off catastrophe temporarily. They learned quickly that triumph and tragedy were inseparable in the skies of war, intertwined like the threads of smoke and sunlight that painted the horizon at dawn. Every sortie demanded more than just physical skill. It required mental resilience and a capacity for rapid, intuitive thought. The boys developed a keen awareness of the environment, how clouds shifted and concealed threats, how sunlight reflected off metal to reveal or betray positions, how the wind carried sound differently at altitude, They learned to anticipate the unexpected, to react instinctively, and to trust their senses and instincts above all else. Each maneuver in the sky was mirrored by lessons learned on the ground: patience, observation, and the ability to make decisions under pressure. The young pilots were not only fighting the enemy, they were learning the contours of courage, the delicate balance between audacity and recklessness, and the precise edge where skill met survival. As the weeks turned into months, the cumulative weight of experience became visible in their expressions, their posture, and their demeanor. They moved with a quiet awareness, speaking less but seeing more. Every glance skyward carried recognition of patterns. Every step across the tarmac reflected hours spent navigating danger. Their eyes, once wide with youthful curiosity, now held a depth that betrayed nights haunted by engines and traces, by comrades lost and civilians spared, by lives shaped irrevocably by necessity and circumstance. The innocence they had arrived with had been tempered into something more formidable, an understanding of the fragility of life, a reverence for precision, and a respect for the power they wielded in flight. Even in moments of reprieve, the memories clung to them. The sunset, golden and peaceful in ordinary circumstances, now reminded them of countless landings and takeoffs under duress. The gentle wind, once a playful companion, carried echoes of roaring engines and bullets tearing through air. The world seemed both familiar and alien, a place of safety they could no longer fully inhabit, yet one they had sworn to protect. And in these quiet moments, the boys contemplated their transformation. They were still young, but the sky had aged them. They had seen life and death from a perspective few civilians could imagine, and each return to the earth brought a silent acknowledgement of the delicate thread that separated the two. Their deadly aim was not merely skill, it was a reflection of their growth, their understanding of responsibility, and their ability to act decisively under extreme pressure. It was the synthesis of instinct, training, and raw courage forged in the crucible of relentless combat. Every plane intercepted, every formation disrupted, every enemy forced away from its target was proof of the transformation they had undergone. And yet it came at a cost. The emotional and psychological toll of each mission lingered long after the engines had cooled. The aircraft parked in neat rows along the tarmac, and the boys had removed their helmets. Sleep was uneasy, and moments of stillness were punctuated by replaying aerial maneuvers and encounters, each memory etched in the vivid clarity of survival. Through all of this, bonds between pilots deepened. Shared trauma became unspoken understanding. Glances communicated more than words ever could. In the moments between sorties, they watched one another, noting exhaustion and stress, offering silent support or a brief nod of acknowledgement. They were a fraternity defined not by age or rank, but by the shared experience of surviving the skies and defending the homeland. Each young pilot carried the knowledge that the survival of his comrades and the safety of the civilian population below rested upon their collective skill and courage. The burden of responsibility became a defining characteristic, shaping their behavior, their decisions, and their outlook on life. And when the night finally fell, draping the airfields in darkness, the boys would reflect on their journeys. They had become a paradox, fragile yet resilient, fearful yet fearless, young yet carrying the wisdom of those who had faced death daily. They had navigated chaos, endured unimaginable pressure, and emerged as soldiers, pilots, and witnesses to history. In their eyes lingered the stories of their transformation, stories that spoke not only of dogfights and aerial victories, but of human endurance, courage, and the delicate balance between youth and deadly purpose. The skies had demanded everything of them, and they had responded with precision, bravery, and a relentless will to survive. By the time the stars emerged, scattered across the velvet night sky, the boys understood the truth of their existence in this war. Every maneuver, every engagement, every risk taken in the air had shaped them irrevocably. Their deadly aim was more than bullets and targets. It was a testament to resilience adaptability, and the profound lessons learned in the crucible of combat. They had become witnesses to both the horrors and the heroism of war, carrying with them the indelible imprint of the skies, the echo of engines, and the weight of responsibility far beyond their years. And while the world below slept, unaware of the battles waged above, these 18-year-olds held in their hands the fragile thread that balanced destruction and survival, adolescence and maturity, fear and courage.